The Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries will come to order. I found it's always a good idea after all of us gathering together to make sure people can hear. So if you can't hear me, then wave your arms or do something, and we'll make sure that Thomas turns up the volume and you can hear us. So if at any time during the hearing you can't hear, let us know. So I want to begin with a few thank yous. First of all, I want to thank the Freon Water Authority for the wonderful tour this morning. It was great fun. It was a lot better than when I was here a year ago, or actually last summer, and there was hardly any water in it. Today to see 8,000 or 9,000 CFS coming out of it was pretty amazing. I want to thank John and Vicki Dykstra for Dykstra's Dairy for the tour. I want to thank the World Egg Expo for allowing us to use this beautiful facility. I want to thank the Tulare Sheriff's Department for providing security for us this afternoon. And I think that's it. So with that, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome our witnesses, members, and our guests in the audience to today's hearing. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on two bills, H.R. 215, the Water for California Act, introduced by Congressman David Valadao, and H.R. 872, the Fish Act, introduced by Congressman Ken Calvert. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman, ranking minority member, and chairman of the full Natural Resources Committee. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. By way of introduction, I'm Cliff Bentz, the chairman of the Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries. I also represent the 2nd District of Oregon, much of which has irrigated agriculture. That's not quite right. The district is huge, and very little of it has irrigated agriculture because we have so little water. But that's one of the reasons I'm very happy to be chair of this committee. I'm grateful to be joined today by several members who represent this region, but who are not on the Natural Resources Committee. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from California, Mr. Valadao, and Mr. Costa be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. To begin today's hearing, I will now defer to my distinguished colleague, David Valadao, who represents part of Tulare for a few introductions, and to begin this hearing. Mr. Valadao.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. Can you guys hear me all right? Thank you all for being here today, and thank you to Chairman Westerman and Bentz for agreeing to host this important field hearing. Since this is a congressional hearing, we are going to begin, as we do with every session of the House of Representatives, with the prayer and the posting of the colors and the Pledge of Allegiance. So I ask Pastor Nicholas Ferguson to lead us in prayer.
Oh, you're going to need a minute here. You gave a pastor a microphone, so I'm going to say some things. It's going to be more than just prayer. The good news is I have to pick up my kids from school in a little bit, so it won't be that long. Romans 13, verse 1 and 2 says this: "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For you who are representatives of the people of California and your other states," because I understand there's representatives from Arkansas and Oregon, "if that verse does not drive you to your knees, you are here representing God's authority. And we need you to be like him. To love God and to love people summarizes the entire word." We just celebrated Easter, and the night that Jesus was betrayed, he prayed for every single one of us in this room. And his prayer was that we would be united, that we would be one. His prayer and to be like God means to unify and not to divide. And we know exactly what that word divide means, because everything in this world is trying to get us to divide. A pastor from Georgia challenged his Senate to move to the middle, and I challenge every single one of you to love the people more than your party, to love God more than your party, and to move to the messy middle where you're going to take shots from the front and the back, but that's where the gold is. With that being said, let's pray. God, I lift up every single person who has a voice in this room to love you and to love the people of this state, to do what is right, to do what you've called them to do. You've appointed them. We lift them up to you. God, give them your wisdom, give them your clarity, give them your strength. Help us as a people to lift them up towards you, to call them to a higher standard because they are appointed by you. God, we needed water and you provided. Help us to use it to the best of our abilities. Thank you for the blessing. Help us, guide us, lead us. In your Son, Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. I now want to recognize the Porterville Military Academy to post colors, and we will have the Tulare Mayor, Ms. Terry Sayer, lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, so please rise.
I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Let me start again by thanking Representative Valadeo and Rep. Duarte for their help in organizing this important hearing. And for the people of this state, let me explain why we're here. California is obviously and terrifically important to America. 40 million people, 15% of the nation's GDP, 70% of the nation's fruit and vegetable production, 22.5 billion in total GDP just a year or so ago. But the terrible drought that California has suffered will be back. And when the water's so abundant now, will be gone. So we're holding this hearing to first hear about two bills that address several things that we in Congress could do to improve California's ability to manage and use one of its most valuable resources, and that, of course, is water. Secondly, we want to hear from Californians what you think Congress should do to help address water supply and management. And third, we want to hear what Californians believe are the obstacles standing between California and the actions that are needed to help make water supply in this state more certain and more reliable. It happens, as I mentioned, that Congressman Valadeo invited me to visit the Central Valley Project last summer. During that visit, I learned these things. First, there's a huge lack of storage, be it through designing more efficient means of recharging the astounding amount of storage space in aquifers. I've heard it's as much as 170 million acre feet of space in aquifers. Increasing the size and number of surface impoundments, or improving water production capacity of your millions of acres of forested watershed. We have an expert here in Bruce Westerman who is the chair of our committee and of course, a forester and engineer. He may speak on this issue. You have lots of dams, but many are antiquated. Your levees and your dikes that are essential to reduction of flood risk have not been necessarily maintained. Water courses themselves have not been maintained, exposing towns and cities to catastrophic floods when water tries to escape and cannot. Your forests are overgrown and choked with understory brush, leaving them tinder dry as they wait to burn. And when they do burn, essential watersheds are destroyed, leading to ever worse and more damaging flooding. I learned that the water originally stored for farmers was now being sent to the ocean, and this has resulted in totally predictable overdraft of groundwater, collapsing aquifers, and dramatic subsidence of huge parts of the Central Valley. And I learned that water supplies have been politically redirected to in-stream uses, fish, with no arrangements for those from whom this water has been taken. Those are just a few of the problems that I learned about last summer. What are the obstacles, which I know we're going to hear about today? Well, one, the failure to invest in these systems. And the question is why? I can't think of something that's more important to California than this system of water delivery that is literally the envy of the world. And so why isn't more money being spent in that, keeping that system up by the entire state? And why are there what I would call prejudiced single-purpose allocations of water, which I'm all too familiar with since I represent the Klamath area up in Oregon and have watched much, if not all, of the water allocated to in-stream uses with no regard for the farmers. A failure to recognize the collateral impact of forced change in water allocation, litigation based on the Clean Water Act, the ESA, NEPA, blocking necessary action, a bureaucratic inertia. It's a lot easier to do nothing than do something. And of course, we are here today to listen to you and to, I hope, learn things that we can do to help. With that, thank you again for being here. I'm very, very happy for this opportunity to listen to our witnesses and to listen to the questions that are going to be asked by my colleagues. And with that, I recognize our full committee chairman, Mr. Westerman, for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz, and thank you for chairing the committee today. It is a real pleasure to be here in Tulare and to have had a chance to visit parts of the San Joaquin Valley. And after saying 2 sentences, I took all the mystery out of who the guy from Arkansas is. So if anybody needs me to talk slower so you can understand, just raise your hand. I'll be glad to do that. I do want to thank Mr. Valadeo and Mr. Duarte for hosting us here and for helping plan the trip. We were in Mr. McClintock's district this morning at Friant Dam, and it's very important for members of Congress to get out and spend time with the men and women whose lives are directly affected by federal policies, and that's the reason we have these field hearings. You'll notice some empty seats down at the end of the other table. It's unfortunate that those seats are empty because we invited people from the administration. We invited folks from the U.S. Department of the Interior and Commerce and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to this hearing. Those who could have been attending but chose not to, from the Bureau of Reclamation, Commissioner Camille Touton, from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Director Martha Williams, Dr. Rick Spinrad, who's Administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and then Mr. Chuck Bonham, the Director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Unfortunately, they chose not to attend today. Instead, the Interior Department chose to submit testimony in writing and in opposition to both bills without being here to answer questions as to why they are opposed to the legislation. In addition, the Bureau of Reclamation is conducting a congressional staff tour of the Central Valley Project. They had time to do that, but not time to attend this hearing. This is disappointing, and I'll say it's unacceptable in telling of how much they disregard the importance of this hearing of congressional oversight and the need to change the status quo. And we have a new policy in place. When we invite folks from the administration to hearings and they choose not to come, automatically generate a letter to the Appropriations Committee, which Mr. Valadeo is on, asking them to consider that when they do the appropriations for those agencies who don't have time for Congress. The only way I've found to get their attention is through the strings of the purse. So I hope the Appropriations Committee will take the recommendation from the authorizing committees with those agencies. And I'm glad that our friend Jim Costa is here today. Jim is he is a Democrat. He used to be on the Natural Resources Committee, and this isn't the first time I've been to California and participated in bipartisan meetings with Jim. He does a fantastic job, and he's talking about working with people to get to solutions. Jim's one of those guys, and Jim, I really appreciate your being here. The last time I was in the San Joaquin Valley was about 2 years ago, and I can tell you, even when we planned this hearing, you were in a drought out here, but how things have changed. This area is experiencing record rainfall and snow and flooding, and it's because of this boom and bust cycle is exactly why our country invested in multi-purpose dams in the first place. It's why we need to clear the way for more storage to reduce the impacts of drought and flooding. When you talk about Western water, it all kind of starts with California. There's obviously more states in the West that are having water problems as well, but being somebody from a place where we usually get more water than we can use, and I just come here and look at what's happening and see the facts and the data. This could be solved. California, the state of California, God, nature produces enough water to meet all your needs. It's just a matter of managing that water, building the proper infrastructure to use it, and it's frustrating that this problem can't get solved because it could be, it could stretch into the neighboring states as well, and we could be very good stewards and very good managers of the resources that we have. We're seeing all the water that's going into the ocean today because of a lack of infrastructure, water that could be saved for those tough times. Congress has issued funding and approval for projects. There was feasibility studies that were done for new storage that had languished in the bureaucracy have been approved, and water operations had some regulatory certainty because of the WIN Act that was passed a few years ago. But now the current administration has put a grinding halt on progress. They propose changing water operations by redoing fish recovery plans on which the operations were based. The proposals to change endangered species plans have delayed construction on 2 off-stream reservoirs, including sites. They, along with the administration, along with some of our colleagues across the aisle who are not here today, not the one that's here today, they also stifled a common-sense raise of Shasta Dam. The Shasta raise and sites combined could capture more than 1 million acre-feet of new storage in this system if they were in place today. But we have the opportunity to change this situation because of legislation introduced by Mr. Valadeo, H.R. 215. It's to restore some balance and to be able to plan for the future. It reauthorizes parts of WIN that would not only help California but also the entire West. It also helps get the Shasta raise out of the ditch. Also, Mr. Calvert from California has introduced H.R. 872 to ensure that 2 agencies managing 2 endangered fish species don't conflict with one another by consolidating those functions into one agency. I'm going to read that again. We need to pass a law to ensure that 2 agencies managing 2 endangered fish species don't conflict with one another by consolidating those functions into one agency. We're in the greatest country in the world, and we've got 2 agencies trying to manage 2 fish species in 2 different ways, and it just creates a gridlock and a grinding halt. We can do much better than that. Again, we will not hear from the Biden administration today. They chose not to provide any witnesses for this hearing. The committee Democrats chose not to provide any witnesses. And again, the status quo is not acceptable. But we do have 6 expert witnesses and our California members here at the dais who care deeply about the future and have pushed for the needed change that we'll talk about today. I look forward to hearing each one of them, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Chair Westerman. As is typical with legislative hearings, the bill sponsors are recognized for 5 minutes to discuss their bill. Mr. Calvert was not able to attend today's hearing, but has provided written testimony on his bill, H.R. 872, the Fish Act, and I ask unanimous consent to include his statement in the hearing record. Without objection. I will now recognize Mr. Valadeo for 5 minutes for a statement on his bill, H.R. 215. Mr. Valadeo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Congressman Dave Valadeo. Thank you all for being here today. I want to first thank Chairman Westerman for bringing the Natural Resources Committee to the Central Valley to have this important hearing. I also want to thank my colleague from Oregon, Subcommittee Chairman Cliff Bentz. He was out here in the fall to learn about some of what we're going to talk about here today. I want to thank him for his partnership working on this critical issue in Washington. Thank you also to the witnesses here today for taking the time to testify. I know we're going to hear some powerful testimony from people who have firsthand experience with our water issues in California and the Central Valley. I don't need to tell any of you in this room, but it is especially important time for the committee to be here. After years of drought, we've had just one of the wettest years on record, and snowpack is currently sitting at about 300% of its typical value. This increased rainfall is welcome news after the severe drought that forced our farmers to turn up pumping groundwater to protect their high-value crops and for communities to meet their needs. As a result of pumping groundwater just to survive, these communities experienced land subsidence at the expense of critical water infrastructure. In the worst cases, farmers were forced to fallow their fields and dry out valuable orchards due to little or no water access. Now these same fields that were dry just a few months back are flooded, and our communities are preparing for what happens next when record snowpack finally melts. This situation we're seeing and the devastating flooding impacting our communities emphasizes the urgent need to be proactive about fixing some of our storage and infrastructure issues so that we are better prepared for these kinds of weather events and resilient to periods of drought. For too long, complex and contradictory laws and regulations that control much of how we're able to pump and what storage projects we're able to move forward have amplified California's water problems. My bill, working to advance tangible and effective reforms, or the Water Act for California, is one we're here today to discuss. And it would help alleviate some of the water problems by increasing water storage, streamlining operations, and bringing much needed accountability to the way our water is managed in this state. The comprehensive legislation promotes water conveyance through the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta consistent with the Endangered Species Act and advances key surface water infrastructure projects, among other things in this bill. It extends authorization of the successful surface water storage project program established by the WIN Act, streamlines operation by requiring the Central Valley Project and State Water Project be operated consistent with the 2019 biological opinions, and increases water infrastructure by making additional funding available for the Shasta Dam and Reservoir Enlargement Project, the most cost-effective water storage project in California. While we cannot control the weather, we can control the laws and the regulations that govern our water and ensure we are using the most common sense possible. If we don't take steps to address some of the misguided policies that prioritize fish over people here in California, the entire country will be impacted. The Central Valley is my home, and like many others here today, I've grown up working in agriculture on my family's dairy farm. With less than 1% of our nation's farmland, the Central Valley produces a quarter of the country's food. If California's water supply problems continue to go unaddressed, it won't just affect those in this room, but the entire country. Food security is a national security issue, and without reliable water supply, our ability to feed the nation will be in jeopardy. It is devastating what we are seeing right now in our communities, completely underwater, and we can and must do better so that we are better prepared for both dry years and wet years. The future of our country's food security and the livelihood of thousands of my constituents depend upon us taking action. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Valadeo. I will now introduce our witnesses. Mr. Jason Phillips, Chief Executive Officer of the Free Water Authority. Mr. Chris White, Executive Director of the San Joaquin River Exchange Contractors Water Authority. Mr. Jeff Sutton, General Manager of the Tehama-Colusa Canal Authority. Mr. Willem Bordeaux, Director of the Westlands Water District. Mr. Aaron Fukuda, General Manager of the Tulare Irrigation District, and Mr. Tony DeGroot of the DG Bar Ranches and DeGroot Dairies. You'll notice that the list I just read does not include anyone from the Biden administration or the Newsom administration. Even though we gave both administrations a customary 2-week notice, they have unfortunately chosen not to participate in today's hearing and instead submitted statements for the record that do not support either bill. Had they been here, they could have explained their positions. Moving along, let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, you must limit your oral statements to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. We use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow, and at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and it will ask you to complete your statement. In fact, what I'll start doing is tapping on the microphone like this, louder and louder, until finally I drown you out. That's how it's going to work. I will also allow all witnesses to testify before member questioning. I now recognize Mr. Phillips for 5 minutes. Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman Bentz. Is this on here? Can you hear me? All right. Chairman Bentz, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm Jason Phillips, CEO of Friant Water Authority. Friant Water Authority operates and maintains the Friant-Kern Canal and advocates on behalf of Friant Division water contractors. The Friant-Kern and Madera Canals, together with Friant Dam and Millerton Lake on the San Joaquin River, form the Friant Division, and on average, the canals deliver over 1 million acre-feet of irrigation water annually to more than 15,000 farms on over 1 million acres of the most productive farmland in the world. Everyone knows that 2023 has been extremely wet here in California. We've experienced flooding, and reservoirs across the state are filling. And now, after several critically dry years requiring severe cutbacks, many people across the nation are asking the obvious question: does this mean the California drought is over? Unfortunately, the answer is no. See, California water shortages are not due to hydrology. We've always known that hydrology here is volatile, with several dry years followed by extreme wet years and flooding. Our water management system was designed specifically to manage this volatile hydrology and weather through the dry years. But currently, even our system of dams and canals cannot meet the state's water needs because decades after they were built, the government will no longer allow our water infrastructure to operate the way it was intended. The situation we find ourselves in has been caused by over 30 years of decisions by state and federal agencies that are not based on any new laws. It is caused by decisions to reallocate water away from communities, away from farms, in increasing quantities to comply with old environmental laws. These decisions continue to be undertaken in many instances because unelected agency staff continue to be delegated the responsibility for being the final decision makers on probably the most significant public policy issue we face in the state of California: how to best manage the state's limited water resources. And to add insult to injury, despite all of the water that has been reallocated to comply with old environmental laws, many of our listed species are now worse off than ever. If you take account for all the environmental water and take that into account with other uses, California currently uses significantly more water every year than is sustainably available. The current patchwork of laws enacted to solve this problem and avoid a crisis are not working. Without additional action by Congress, failure is guaranteed, and California's environment and economy will never be what it was or what most people want it to be. So is it worth re-diverting all this water, our most precious resource, away from people? Well, frankly, I'm not the right person to ask. But I also don't think the right person to ask is the unelected government employee that has no accountability to the public. People that are elected to represent us need to be the ones held accountable for decisions about how our most important resource is managed and allocated. The laws need to be updated to rightly put the accountability for creating man-made droughts back on elected officials in an open and transparent fashion. For those reasons and the reasons laid out in my written testimony, the Friant Water Authority supports H.R. 215, the Water for California Act, and H.R. 872, the Fish Act. The rigid and severely constrained management of the CVP over the last 30 years is not working for our communities or the environment. And the calls for an ever-increasing amount of water diverted from cities and farms to provide additional flows out to the ocean need to be reversed. To be clear, current operational requirements imposed by government, delegated to unelected employees by Congress's inaction, will guarantee that our next water shortage crisis is right around the corner. We need to be asking how we can bring balance back to our system and increase available water for all needs in all years. I again thank the subcommittee for traveling to the Valley to hold this critical hearing and for the opportunity to testify. I hope that this hearing and bills before the subcommittee start moving things in a positive direction. I continue working with you all. I respect each one of you. You've all been of great help in many times, and Jim specifically, I want to thank you for being here. And also I'll mention your Canal Act you just introduced. Be very helpful. It's very timely. I hope that can move as well. So thank you for crossing over the line and being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. I now recognize Mr. White for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Is my voice carrying? Good afternoon, Chairman Westerman and Bentz, and congressional members. First, we want to welcome you and thank you for holding this hearing in the Central Valley. And thank you for the opportunity to present testimony on behalf of the San Joaquin River Exchange Contractors Water Authority. My name is Chris White. I'm the Executive Director for the Exchange Contractors. We are responsible for administering conservation plans, transfer programs, water resources planning, as well as advocating for dependable water supplies for our member agencies and the 240,000 acres that they represent. I would like to express our great appreciation for Congressman Calvert and Congressman Valadeo for their unflagging efforts and the pursuit of water supplies for California during their careers in Congress. I would also place Congressman Costa in that same category. In just the last few months, record precipitation fell and record snowpack accumulated in this part of the state. This enormous volume of precipitation, which followed a 3-year period of extreme drought, if you look at the historical weather patterns, climate extremes are obviously the norm in California. Those extremes, combined with the current regulatory environment, make providing reliable water supplies for water users throughout the state very challenging, if not impossible. Environmental, urban, and agricultural water users need more tools to be able to adaptively manage through those extremes if we ever hope to have a truly drought-resilient water supply. What's needed to manage these weather conditions is the type of regulatory certainty, placing focus on investment in water resilience projects, and the forward-thinking tools provided in H.R. 215 and H.R. 872. I asked myself, well, what if H.R. 215 had already been in place for a couple years? Well, today project operations would be more stable for all water users in the state, including environmental, urban, and agricultural interest, in a way that protects the operations of both the state and federal projects. That stability would provide the space for development of plans and storage and conveyance, and lead to a much more comprehensive drought resiliency plan. A plan that provides more environmental cold water in the north, along with the additional ground and surface water storage throughout the CVP. With respect to H.R. 872, the exchange contractors believe that the change envisioned under this bill is long overdue. Combining ESA implementation responsibilities of both NIMS and Fish and Wildlife Service within one federal agency is a win-win for the fish, the environment, the federal government, and us stakeholders. Our region is working on projects that would advance the plans envisioned within H.R. 215. The exchange contractors are working on working with Del Puerto Water District on the Del Puerto Canyon Reservoir Project, in which we are very grateful for the support we have received from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. The Del Puerto Canyon Reservoir Project, combined with the proposed raising of the BF6 dam, would provide an additional 210,000 acre-feet of storage in our backyard that could be used for future drought purposes. In addition, our region is working on a number of regional and small groundwater storage projects. The exchange contractors are working with our neighbors on conversion of the existing Los Banas Creek detention dam, which is a flood control project, converting it into a water storage project with water supply benefits for wildlife, for agriculture and for the city of Los Banos. We're also working on groundwater banks in both Los Banos and Timber Creeks. Also, as the current flood circumstances demonstrate, maintenance and reestablishment of conveyance capacities of our local flood channels and water conveyance infrastructure is vitally needed to be able to save water for future droughts. Again, thank you for the opportunity to appear here today and share some of our thoughts with the subcommittee. We will be happy to provide more information and details on the topics that we just discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. I now recognize Mr. Sutton for 5 minutes.
Chairman Bentz, members of the subcommittee, Congressman Costa, thank you for joining us as well. And Chairman Westerman, thank you for coming out here from Arkansas. And thank you to all the folks here in the crowd. I think folks would rather be out this time of year farming and growing the food that feeds our nation, the world. But fortunately, because some of the challenges we're trying to address here today, we're in this room trying to fix problems. But thank you for being here. My name is Jeff Sutton. I'm the general manager of the Tama-Cluse Canal Authority. We operate the Northern California, the Sacramento Canals Unit. Closer. Sorry. Is that better? Thank you. General manager of the Tama-Cluse Canal Authority. We manage the Sacramento Canals Unit of the CVP, serving 17 water districts through 4 counties on the west side of the Sacramento Valley. Our service area is 150,000 acres and provides about $1 billion annually to our local and regional economy. And I should say, where we are, and similar to where we're sitting here today, agriculture is our economy. When that goes bad, our communities suffer greatly. And we saw that just recently through this drought from 2020 to 2022. But I want to actually back up to 2017 and 2019. The CVP was built. They modeled this to get through the drought of the late 20s and early 30s. Supposed to provide 5 years of drought protection. 2017, we were spilling 85,000 CFS over Shasta. The ground was shaking below the dam. It was awesome. 2019, again, the same thing happened. It would have sure been nice to have an extra additional 18.5 feet to store an extra 680,000 acre feet of water and also have that added flood protection. Not to mention, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, a site's reservoir downstream to capture some of that water as well. 5 years of protection. 2020, turn around. We dropped a lot of water for Delta smelt habitat. Water service contractors the very next year in Northern California, and even worse, we were at 50% the very next year, spilling water over Shasta. South of Delta was even much worse than that. Then we experienced 2021 and 2022. 2 years of a zero allocation for our entire service area, and also the service areas of the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority. 2022 was extremely, we've never experienced in the history of our valley. The Sacramento River settlement contractors, the most senior rights that predate the Central Valley Project, the back upon which the Central Valley Project was built. In drier years, they're supposed to get not less than 75%. That promise had never been broken in history. They received 18% for single species management for winter run salmon below Shasta Reservoir. It crippled our communities. Glen Cluse Irrigation District, one of the oldest water and biggest water right holders on the Sacramento River, my great-great-grandfather signed the document and chaired the meeting that created that organization. And they typically plant 100,000 acres of rice. The district's 150,000 acres. They planted 1,100 acres in 2022. Several districts at 18%, it was so inefficient they couldn't even operate, which actually allowed us to purchase some of that water and keep our permanent crops alive to avoid even a bigger disaster. Those are expensive transfers, and to add insult to injury, it occurred during a time they got a freeze, and they had no income coming in from those trees as well. And I'm looking at my time, and I'm talking too long, so I want to say the system is broken. We've got to fix it. Both of these bills are a step in the right direction. I'm also the vice chairman of the Sites Joint Powers Authority, a 4 billion, 1.5 million acre foot reservoir that we're working feverishly and have been since our organization was started in 2010 to build that. We're making progress, but we need to make these projects a lot easier to implement. It's incredibly challenging. Those investments, these crises are predictable. It's going to stop raining again. We're going to experience droughts, but they're preventable if we make the right investments. I also want to say regarding the Fish Act, let me get to my notes on that. What we're doing now is just, it lacks common sense. It's inefficient, it's ineffective, it's in constant conflict. You have one fish against another, release all the water out of Shasta for the Delta smelt, hold it for the winter run salmon. And I want to say, moreover, when you're not providing water to those working landscapes, you're hurting a whole host of other species that rely on that habitat. And what we're going to do is result in having more listed species while we're not helping the fishery species either. I'll close. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton, and I now recognize Mr. Bordeaux for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bentz and members of the subcommittee. It's an honor to appear before you. My name is William Bordeaux. I bring 26 years of experience in business, agriculture, and public service to the subcommittee. Today I'm testifying as a Westlands Water District Director. My family's lived in the west side of the San Joaquin Valley for over 100 years, and in the early days I was told there was nothing but tumbleweeds and alkali. Now it's one of the most productive farming regions in the world. Pioneering individuals built these projects that move water from where it's abundant to where it's needed. We are all beneficiaries of the immense foresight and the incredible infrastructure that has been built. Westlands farmers are extremely productive. We are blessed with fertile soil, a Mediterranean climate, and the Sierra Nevada mountains that capture a significant amount of snow, as highlighted this year. Farmers in Westlands are able to grow approximately 60 different crops with a value of $2 billion, generating around $4.7 billion in farm-related economic activity each year, supporting nearly 35,000 jobs and benefiting the local communities and across the state. Growing up in Kalinga, when I was young, I would have never imagined being involved in something so impactful. The Central Valley Project and the State Water Project are truly feats of human ingenuity and engineering. They are designed to deliver reliable water supplies to support the people and industries that now call California home. But our water management system needs to be adapted and to be improved. We need to modernize the state's water infrastructure, particularly storage, so that we can capture more water when it's plentiful and preserve it for when it's dry. We also need smarter, science-based regulatory approaches that will allow for biological-based management that achieves environmental goals, adaptively manages resources to optimize overall benefits, and encourages cooperation rather than conflict. Both the Water for California Act and the Fish Act reflect common sense approaches to real issues facing California. These bills are timely, especially if we want the next generation of Californians to pursue farming as a career. We need to address the challenges that are driving people away. Farmers are leaving California. Some of them I know well, and their decisions to leave are at least in some part related to the lack of adequate and reliable water supply. Without sufficient water, it's impossible to have the crop production that is needed to run a business, employ people, and contribute a necessity to society. The Water for California Act includes important provisions to advanced water storage in California. We need to store more water to improve reliability. When farmers do not receive their allocations, they fallow the land and rely more heavily on groundwater, with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act making this even more complicated. The results are serious. People lose jobs, food banks are strained, schools lose attendance, the tax base takes a hit, and the human impacts are severe. I'm also concerned about the food security implications of reducing the ability for farmers to farm in the San Joaquin Valley. As a Marine, I know disrupting supply lines are key to military success. If this country does not produce its own food, we will become vulnerable. It's good public policy to support farming communities. It's in our national interest. Communities in the Central Valley have at times run out of water or have been unable to provide safe drinking water. Quite simply, the lack of reliable water threatens the economy and public health. The federal government plays an important role in operating key water infrastructure in California, and it should be a partner in ensuring that the projects are able to satisfy their multiple purposes, including delivery delivering an adequate and reliable water supply to people and farms. There have been many times when requirements imposed by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service have conflicted with requirements imposed by the National Marine Fisheries Service. Having two different federal agencies consulting over operations of federal water projects also adds to the complexity of ESA compliance. In conclusion, I fully acknowledge the immense challenges involved in managing California's water resources. The state continues to grapple with rapid hydrologic changes as atmospheric rivers deliver much-needed rainfall and snowpack following 3 years of the driest in California's recorded history. Efficiently capturing and transporting this water to where it's needed remains a daunting task. However, infrastructure improvements alone are insufficient to achieve water supply reliability. In the Central Valley, we aspire to foster thriving ecosystems and fish populations alongside flourishing businesses and farms. To realize this vision in California, we must maintain operational flexibility and implement improvements in the regulatory landscape. Regulations ought to be grounded in scientific evidence, with regulatory action only when they address specific biological needs. I believe the two bills under consideration today would help to accomplish these important goals. I again thank the subcommittee for allowing me to testify today at the field hearing and look forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bordeaux, and I now recognize Mr. Fukuda for 5 minutes.
Chairman Benson, Westerman, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak at my first committee hearing. So this is a first for me, so bear with me. My name is Aaron Fukuda. I'm the general manager of the Tulare Irrigation District. We're one of the oldest irrigation districts in the state of California, formed in 1889. Since its inception, the district has developed an irrigation system with 300 miles of canals, 1,300 acres of recharge basins, and a water supply portfolio that includes water rights on the Kauai River system and a contract with the Bureau of Reclamation. To quote my friend and colleague Eddie Ocampo, director at Self-Help Enterprises, the culture of our region is agriculture. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. What we've found is that our region has suffered from these climatic swings between wet and dry, and we haven't been given the tools to prepare ourselves for these wet and dry years. With limited investment in aging and new infrastructure, along with the burdensome regulatory atmosphere we find ourselves here in California. Over the last 3 years, our Tulare Irrigation District has received such little surface water supply that we have not had an irrigation run, and therefore our growers have had to turn to groundwater to backstop their agricultural needs. This has been devastating to our economics, as we don't have any revenue to cover our ongoing expenses, but the risk is the future. When we look forward, do we have the surface water storage that we know we're going to have a water supply in the coming years? And so our region has had to go to groundwater to keep our agricultural communities thriving. As our groundwater depleted, we hit our all-time lows in our groundwaters this fall of 2022. Many of our communities, predominantly disadvantaged, like the community of Okieville, had numerous domestic wells that went dry this last year. So this need to use groundwater was driven by the necessity to keep our agricultural communities simply alive. In the fall of 2022, though, we were greeted in December with a wet season and 9 atmospheric rivers, which was much needed. While we enjoyed a short reprieve in February 2022, in early March, we received several warm atmospheric river systems. For the first time in decades, local reservoirs were put into spill conditions, and downstream rivers received flows that exceeded channel capacities. Widespread flooding conditions were experienced in the upper Kauai River system, the lower St. Johns River system, and down into the lower historic Tulare Lake bed. Crop damage is significant in our area with extensive. Farmers are losing their winter wheat crops, and others are losing permanent crops such as citrus and nut crops. Small communities such as Lindsay, Woodlake, Alpaw, and Almsworth that surround our hearing today also have experienced severe flooding conditions requiring residents to abandon their homes with very little notice. But given these dramatic swings in hydrology, our local communities have tried to lean into these hard times and prepare for the next disaster. So how are we doing, and how maybe can this committee help? In the face of the drought conditions last year, our agricultural community passed the 2022 emergency ordinance, which cut back on groundwater pumping in our area. We saved about 13% of our ag demand, which is about 20,000 acre feet. and then turn that into this wet year by doubling our recharge rate from 700 acre-feet to 1,500 acre-feet per day. But with the ability to now reduce groundwater, we still found some of our local domestic wells were drying up. And we can do with some federal support to help backstop these wells and get them to resiliency by drilling them deeper. There's also a much better way to buffer extremes, and that's with multi-benefit reservoirs. Our Seaborne Reservoir project is a shining example, and I want to thank Congressman Valadeo, Costa, and McCarthy, who are graciously trying to support our project and help us find funding. This project is an 8,000 acre-foot off-stream reservoir with a habitat restoration zone and a reservoir and a community center to be used for educating our youth and community on agriculture and the habitat supported in the area. The project will allow the district to help the region by providing much-needed flood relief during high flows, such as this year, drought resiliency by allowing increased recharge opportunities in and around disadvantaged communities, and the development of a community education center. Last but not least, our region really does need a water supply reliability and regulatory relief to ensure that we can have water supply guaranteed to us under our contractual obligations with the Bureau of Reclamation, as well as our pre-1914 water rights. H.R. 215 and H.R. 872 make too much sense, and they're the path forward for securing those needs. By ensuring that our water supply is governed by sound and modern science in an adaptive manner, such that the Central Valley Project is operated to support the needs of our region, we can ensure that our region has the water supply to achieve sustainability. On behalf of the Tulare Irrigation District, I thank the committee for holding this hearing here in Tulare. We are committed to working with members of Congress and the administration to ensure that we have a thriving agriculture community, and that begins with a resilient water supply and infrastructure to support that. This concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions the members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Fukuda. And with that, I recognize Mr. DeGroot for 5 minutes.
With all that said, I'm about done with my speech. Thank you, House of Representatives, for having us here. My name is Tony DeGroot, a local dairy farmer, Kings County. I'm the second-generation farmer, along with my son Jared being the third, and his sons hopefully to be the fourth. I've been asked to give a short testimony of events in our area, along with possible struggles which may hinder my sleep at night. I'd like to start by thanking our God for sending us the water we have been praying for. I believe God has given us an open door and opportunity to act on the abundance of rain and snow He has given us for the fourth time in my lifetime. We are blessed with storms every year, but I have only seen flooding of this magnitude in 1969, in 82, 97, and now again here in 2023. Unfortunately, this year's rain and snowpack will be another wasted blessing if we watch it go by and do not invest in our dry future years. In preparation for the speech, I was asked to bring a few challenges I face as well. A challenge that we do have in our area, being a white area farmer, is to have a representation on our local GSA board. We are making some headway. We are getting people to listen to us now, but it would be nice to have a seat at that table so our voices could also be heard. And second, we need more infrastructure by way of canals, sinking basins, reservoirs, pipelines, pumps. Would also make the use of new expanded dams more valuable, allowing all farmers to have increased access to surface water. Another much-needed asset to California would be the success of the Valley Blueprint, not only for wet years, but as much in dry years. We believe the answer for salmon and wildlife, along with farmers in for the future of California farmers, could all be worked together. But the Valley Blueprint is a big piece of our future, and I hope we can make some progress there. I would also like to share my account of flooding and successes in our communal response in our area. Our family dairy farms in Hanford, California, where Cross Creek and Highland Canals cross. I received a call from my neighbor who was asking for my input, as he had never witnessed or been through one of these devastating floods in our area. After a quick assessment, it was clear that this was the biggest flood I had ever witnessed. At that time, water was flowing through railroad tracks, over Grangeville Boulevard, through fields, and heading in his direction. If desperate measures had not been taken, Portions of 2 dairies, including feed yards and houses, would have been flooded. Temporary dams were built on Grangeville. Tractor pumps were pumping water to higher ground. Levees were constructed to hold water back from feed areas. Due to abnormally high water flows in Cross Creek and Highland Canal, it was breached in several spots, allowing an unprecedented amount of water to flow towards the city of Corcoran. Over the next couple of days, a bypass channel was constructed on the property of Jack DeYoung, south of Highway 198, from Highland Canal back into Cross Creek, where it originated from upstream. The Highland Canal now has a newly constructed dam with a head gate to allow a percentage of water to pass for downstream users and percolation. I share this story because when I got the initial call, I immediately called the Kings County Board of Supervisors for their help. Within 3 days, they had 3 emergency meetings that would have normally taken 30 years just to approve. Now, all of the work we did got accomplished in only 30 hours. This was all made possible with communication and common sense of local farmers, authorities working together. It can happen. There's an emergency. It should happen all the time. Let's cut some red tape and allow these things to happen as they need to. My family is blessed that our facilities are elevated just high enough that our structures have stayed dry. However, we do have approximately 600 acres of great farmland underwater. This is significant due to the implementation of SGMA and new water allocations and fees on top of our pumping costs. We have cut our wheat planting acreage down 50% compared to previous years. And now of that remaining 50%, this year's wheat is now underground. Another unknown factor is how long the flooded acres will remain flooded and how we will now feed our cattle for the remainder of the year. For us and many like us, there will be a feed shortage with wheat and alfalfa drowning throughout the Central Valley. With 600 flooded acres, this means that about 50% of our corn ground may remain underwater for this season as well. I'm not looking for pity. There are many in much worse condition. Those that have lost their facilities, moved cattle entirely off of their facilities, and all of their farm ground is underwater. It is very devastating, and I'm sorry for those people, and the community I hope is still standing behind you as well. I can remember as a child going with my father to meetings as he advocated for the Mid-Valley Canal. However, it failed because people had no vision of what things would look like with no water. Well, 50 years later, we can see it now. I can envision what California will look like with more dams, more canals, new methods of irrigation, all while preserving more wildlife and habitat while continuing family farming for generations to come. Congressman Valadeo and all the panel, thank you so much for not only hearing our concerns, but for acting on our behalf. I was taught many years ago that if you take care of the ground, it will take care of you. As I learned from my dad, our goal is to leave this world a better place than what we received it. And if we all work together, I believe this goal is achievable for generations to come. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, all of you witnesses, for your testimony, and I will now recognize members for 5 minutes for questions. We'll begin with Mr. McClintock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Phillips, on the tour of Bryant Dam you gave us today, you said that we could face major flooding because Millerton Lake cannot contain the runoff and may not be able to release it fast enough. If Temperance Flat had been built, would you have the same concern?
I would not have the same concern, Congressman. We have 3 million acre feet of snowpack above Millerton Lake right now, and it has about 300,000 acre feet of capacity. So there's no way to correctly do the math on that when it comes off.
So too late for Temperance Flat?
Too late this year.
To prevent what you see
The million acre feet that Temperance Flat would have been able to provide, because we're going to have to release about 600,000 to 2 million acre feet, somewhere in that range. So
nobody made mention of the fact that twice in the decade we've seen historic droughts followed by years of record rainfall. During the droughts, our reservoirs were drawn down perilously low. 500,000 acres of farmland was desiccated. Thousands of farm workers lost their job. This year, we've experienced atmospheric rivers that have caused massive damage from flooding. The floodgates on those same dams are now wide open. They're pouring millions of acre-feet of water into the ocean because we've got no place to store the excess. Mr. Sutton, what do you suppose nature is trying to tell us?
There are some solutions that I think if we can get out of our own way, it takes federal, state, local partnership, and I think a lot of folks have stepped up, but some folks have continued to try and create impediments. We need to build dams.
The last generation was able to do that effortlessly. We're still living from the gifts of the founders, they say. In 1959, the legislature passed the Burns-Porter Act. It included a water bond of $1.75 billion. Now, you do the inflation adjustment, that's about $17 billion in today's money. Now, with that $17 billion in today's money, we built 10 storage dams, 11 ancillary dams that store 7 million acre-feet of water, and, by the way, also generate 3,000 megawatts of the cleanest and cheapest electricity on the planet. And with what was left over, we built the California Aqueduct. Now, it's kind of interesting. In the last, since 2000, voters have approved 6 water bond measures, $27 billion, including $17 billion of that we've already spent. So we spent about the same as we did in the entire Burns-Porter Act, all promising to enhance California's water supply. So I wonder, Mr. Sutton, can you tell me what our generation has gotten with $17 billion of water bond spending?
We haven't gotten 7 million acre-feet of new storage. We've gotten promises, and we're working to get across the finish line, trying to overcome challenges. I'll reference...
So our generation's dropped the ball. Why is that? What is keeping us from doing what the last generation accomplished so effortlessly?
Regulatory hurdles.
So we've done it to ourselves. We're not suffering because of acts of God. We're suffering because of acts of government. Is that a fair statement?
It's a very fair statement, Congressman. The Sites Reservoir Project has been in the book since the 1950s.
Mr. Bordeaux, would it be helpful to streamline the process for new dam construction, put the Bureau of Reclamation in charge of all federal permitting agencies for an application, require the permitting process to run concurrently and not consecutively, and put a 2-year time limit on that process?
It would be tremendously helpful. It's unbelievable to me that we're able to build sports stadiums in record time. And though I like sports, but I don't think they help society the same way water infrastructure would. Mr.
Chairman, by the way, my H.R. 186 would do exactly that. It passed the House when we last held the majority. I would hope that we'll get consideration of that measure before the summer. Mr. DeGroot, we keep hearing about agricultural water. I wonder, is there really such a thing? I understand that a cheeseburger, for example, requires about 700 gallons of water to grow the stuff in that cheeseburger. A pair of jeans, about 1,500 gallons of water. So isn't this entire discussion one between abundance and scarcity, or prosperity and poverty for our children?
The amount of water that is claimed to even grow one almond, I believe, is over 60 or 80 gallons, I've heard.
So that's water that we use in our daily lives. That's the water that's necessary to produce the prosperity that we enjoyed and once took for granted in what was once a golden state.
Yes,
and we can't do that anymore because when something is scarce, it becomes expensive. When it's plentiful, it's cheap. We are making water more and more scarce, therefore more and more expensive, and we're thus sabotaging the very prosperity that once brought our forebearers to this state looking for a better future. Is that an adequate summary of what's taken place with these environmental laws?
The environmental laws are keeping, just one example, is our forestry. We are not taking care of our forestry. We're letting the trees get overrun, if we cut out half the
That's a
trees,
subject for a different day and a different subcommittee.
well, it kind of plays in
But you're
line,
right.
right? So water's staying up in those mountains, and for our valley here, a lot of our water comes through snowmelt, which comes here. Now, if those trees are taking that water up and evaporating it, that's less water that we're getting in this direction again. So just another environmental thing. That's not our choice. That's what's happened. The biggest one still is if we took these gentlemen here to my right and maybe asked if they could live off the schmelt, maybe let them eat schmelt and drink water only the rest of their lives, maybe they would look at the rest of their food that we are growing for them a little differently.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McClintock. Mr. Lamalfa, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bentz, and also Chairman Western, and for allowing us to have this field hearing for our Natural Resources Committee. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks for all the audience showing up here today and being heard. Let me go to Mr. Phillips here. You've mentioned that there's a variety of projects in California that could be built, and for example, we have many that are on the books that have been engineered or at least studied in the past. And the Auburn Dam, I think, has even been come back into being mentioned, which is a significant amount of storage. So what can be done to get the higher-ups in BOR, since you representing BOR, in the conversation along with Bryant? What can we get these folks upstairs to start agreeing with us on the need for water storage instead of the slow slog we're seeing with Sites Reservoir and every other project? Talking with the Dykstra family, Lake Success, in order to get 10 more feet added to it, 28,000 acre feet, 20-plus years of jabbering about that.
Congress is going to have to just direct which projects are to be built and get them going, because agency staff have figured out the formula to keep any project from ever getting built, because the time to get the environmental permitting done is longer than any election cycle, so it's just a never-ending loop. So Congress just needs to say, these are the projects you will build, and here's the funding for it.
Do you notice there's a change in attitude depending on which political party is in power in the White House or maybe in the governor's office?
I've been through a lot of different administrations. There is a change of attitude, and I've also noticed that a lot of the agency staff are the same.
They stay the same. Yeah, they outlast us. That's the counter argument for term limits, because the bureaucracy stays in place and we're here and gone. So I know it looks self-serving for an elected to say no term limits, but it's indeed very frustrating for us on this end. I'm a farmer in my real life too. And Mr. Fukuda, how much we spent on high-cost rail here in California, you think?
You couldn't. Wow, what a first committee testimony. I don't know, but I'm going to say too much. I lost track in the billions, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's underwater, right where we told them not to put it.
Literally.
They asked a bunch of farmers, where should you put it? Don't put it in the subsidence bowl. Where'd they put it? In the subsidence bowl. At the end of the day, wake up and ask a farmer what you should do in the morning. You're going to get a straight answer. They didn't listen, and now they're dealing with the ramifications.
Yeah, I've taken a wild guess. It's hard to keep track, but I think they've maybe spent around $20 billion for a project originally told to be $33 billion, and there's probably estimates are conservative at $120 billion. We hear in our committee from some of our opponents that, oh, this water storage is so expensive. And when you add the costs of the floods, just we saw at the Dykstra Dairy here, and the neighbors there, what they're going to get in crop losses and orchards being wiped out, the other damage you get from floods to communities and just everything else, the flood value itself. And the water has value, of course. Hydroelectric power. Me and Mr. Bentz share that Oregon border there where they want to tear out 4 perfectly good hydroelectric dams. We want CO2-free power coming from either nuclear power plants or hydro, I guess, if we want to get rid of CO2. I remind you, CO2 is only, take this home, 0.04% of our atmosphere. It's not the end of our world we have in CO2, okay? So water storage means good things. I'm representing Lake Shasta and Lake Orville up there and sites. We have an opportunity with raising Shasta, as was mentioned, 630,000 acre feet by just an 18-foot raise on an existing project. Sites Reservoir, which would be an easy project to build, right in Jeff Sutton's office is like 10 feet from it practically, would be an easy build. 1.5 million acre feet when full. That's 2.1 million acre feet for all Californians. Whether it's environmental water or farm water, and it'll all make hydroelectric power if allowed to. So it's all pluses. And it even gives us a luxury on Lake Shasta of they don't let the water out for agriculture in the spring anymore because they want to keep as much. They want to keep the lake fuller, higher elevation, so the water at the bottom stays colder, so they can release that water off the bottom later in the fall, so the river will be 1 degree colder in temperature, thinking that's going to make all the difference in the amount of fish that might come up the Sacramento River. I tell you, since 1992, it's hundreds of thousands of new acre feet have been flushed out through the Delta. We now have less smelt, we have less salmon, and it's futile. So I got a bill for you on that. The House passed it, H.R. 1, to streamline a lot of this nonsense and getting projects done, as well as forestry, as was mentioned. Forestry is very important for the water actually getting down the hill when we have the right amount of trees per acre. Mr. Westerman's going to hit that one out of the park probably in a minute, as well as these great bills we have here. Calvert's bill, the Fish Act. Why can't we have one-stop shopping for permits? It's just a constant spanking line of having to go through all these different lettered agencies to try and get anything done, because they know, as was said, it's a ball game of trying to stop it. So anyway, I need to stop there, but I look forward to working with you folks. God bless you for hanging in there. Please don't give up on us. We got good ideas. We're going to push them through. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamalfa. I recognize Mr. Duarte for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and David for having us all here today. Great work on this. Whoa. So California, I think Tom touched on this, $3 trillion economy annually. Everyone name a favorite water project and what's the outside number it might cost. Raising Shasta, Mr. Bordeaux?
Well, unfortunately, it costs billions.
Billions? How many billions? 2 billion, okay. Four, okay, got 6 billion. Come on, add it up.
Seaborn Reservoir, 23 million.
Wow. Okay, I need even billions here.
Del Porto, 800,000. 800 million.
I think it's 80 million, isn't it? 800 million or 800 million? Okay, it's almost a billion. We'll call that 6 billion.
Well, temperance, 3 billion.
3 billion. Okay, we're under 10 billion. $36 billion would be 1% of California's GDP in 1 year. We're talking about gold-plated water infrastructure, water abundance for every Californian, for every industry, new housing dropping in cost because we no longer have water constraints to build homes. We're talking about every Californian having a rent or a mortgage payment going down by $1,000 a year for water infrastructure that would cost us 1/3 of 1% of California's annual GDP. That's the math. We are dealing with agencies. We have to call it out as it is. These are simply the lords of scarcity. They gain power over us by keeping us on the edge of privation. The working American family, the lowest 40% income of Americans, is spending 25% of their annual income on food alone. Yet we're taking probably God's greatest agricultural gift. We've got the largest watershed in the world with the Sierra Nevadas. We've got the largest precipitation bank in the world with the Pacific Ocean. We've got the largest, most fertile valley in the world here in the Central Valley. And we've got a Mediterranean climate. You know, you can't talk about agriculture without seeing a map of the globe and where are all the Mediterranean climate, and it's little spicks and spats all over, except right here. We've got the biggest Mediterranean climate in the world. And yet, because of the most prosperous, 5th nation in the world, if California was a nation, with the biggest innovation hubs, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, Los Angeles, won't invest 1/3 of 1% of its GDP, annual GDP, to create 2 or 3 generations of water infrastructure. Let's say 1 generation, 2 generations to catch up, plus leave it in place for the next generation. Then they might have to think about it and revisit it then. We've got to understand this for what it is. We have to be the champions of abundance and call out these agencies for being anti-human scarcity mongers. And there's really no happy way to put that. This is just mean. It's mean to working families. It's mean to hungry people. It's mean to, you know, look at Woke Moses, our governor. He goes to Florida and he wants to tell and stem the U-Haul tide. Well, I can tell Woke Moses how to stem the U-Haul tide. Build the water infrastructure. Let California's economy and people thrive again. Feed the world. That's how we do it. So this coming summer, we need to make some hay here. When towns are flooding, let's remember this and make sure we get it out in the media. When food prices go up again this year, even as affordability is lost and the economy and the opportunity of better jobs kind of ebbs and flows. I see some folks over here with, it looks like you belong to a group of working families or a labor group or something. I'm happy to have you here because you're who we're fighting for. You're the ones that count Fridays. If you count Friday, you're a working family. If you know how many Fridays are in the month, how many paychecks you're going to get, you're a working family, and you are getting pushed against the edge of privation right now. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for coming and giving your stories. They're all fairly credible. I'm more accustomed to having the guys on the far end of the table down there, the ones that aren't here today. We should name them because they deserve recognition. Martha Williams from the Fish and Wildlife Services isn't here today. Now, they're the ones that blocked the permit in Planada when the Army Corps wanted to allow them to clean up the ditch that just flooded the same grammar schools, the same working families' homes in Planada twice in 5 years. That was the Fish and Wildlife Service that blocked the Army Corps of Engineers permitting that. Jim Costa, my good friend down here, reached over in a Farm Bureau meeting the other day and said, wait a minute, I got the money to clean that ditch and fix that levee 5 years ago when the school flooded 5 years ago. Well, Martha Williams is not here today to explain that to us. Rick Spinard from the NOAA isn't here today to talk to us about how we haven't saved the salmon in 40 years of flows out to the Delta, and how the smelt and the salmon are both still in decline despite our depleted aquifers and economic duress here. Camille Towton from the Bureau of Reclamation is not here today to talk about their flood control plans for this coming summer and what they intend to do and how carefully they're all working together to make sure there's a flood control plan and immediate dredging of our waterways to make sure that we get the water out to the ocean without destroying our communities. And Charlton Bonham is not here from California Fish and Wildlife. So, to give the permits to build sites. Yeah. What's that? To give us the permits through so we can build sites reservoir. So, let's not understand this for anything but what it is. These are the lords of scarcity pushing working families up against the edge of privation right where they want you. Thank you. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you, Mr. Duarte, and thank you, Mr. Costa, first of all, for being here, and you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and for bringing the subcommittee here to our valley, the valley that we love and we raise. And Mr. Chairman, it's good to have you back always. I have been involved in these issues, as has been noted, for a few years, even before I had this Arctic blonde hair you're looking at. And, you know, one thing that I think is true is that water in California has always been complicated and controversial. And some people want to reverse the order. Controversial and complicated, it's both. And clearly, everybody here in this hearing, I believe, views, as I do, food a national security issue. And we understand the critical importance of investing in our infrastructure that has allowed us to do what we've been able to in California, invest in our infrastructure for decades through generations. Having been involved in a whole host of issues back to my days when I chaired the Senate Ag and Water Committee in Sacramento to the last 18 years, we've had progress in areas with the intertie that has moved hundreds of thousands of acre feet. We've had progress in getting reset in 2014, Senator Feinstein and I and others on the biological opinions that need to be implemented now. And I appreciate some of the testimony to that point. And that President Trump signed in 2019 in the authorization. But the fact of the matter is it's hard. All of this is hard. I mean, you add up the additional water supply that we need and raising San Luis Reservoir, building sites, Los Vasqueros, Del Porto, and all of that would add up to a significant amount of water, over 2 million acre-feet of water. And if we had that today, we'd be in a much better position. We also need to look at improving our water corridors, and I'm glad that that was mentioned earlier about the efforts on the canal bills for the Fry and Kern Canal that we're currently rehabbing, the Delta Mendota Canal, and the California Aqueduct. Let me get to a couple questions here because I think that we have a consensus that we need to fix our broken water system. We need to create sustainability that we don't have today. And currently, you know, I told Ag Committee hearing we had 2 weeks ago, we had extreme droughts. And for 3 years, we prayed and we prayed and we prayed for more rain and snow in the mountains. And in the last 3 months, man, I guess we prayed too well because we certainly have gotten the rain and the snow that we needed. But now we don't have the capability of handling this with the extreme droughts and the extreme weather conditions. Mr. Phillips, you talked about the lack of coordination with the different groups, and you've worked very hard with others here on the blueprint. Can you give a quick description, because I want to ask some other questions, on the water blueprint for fixing our broken water system here in the Valley?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. And the blueprint is a coalition of water agency representatives and farm representatives and community representatives with one mission in mind, and that is unifying behind what the San Joaquin Valley needs to have all the water to avoid having to rely on groundwater overdraft.
Quickly, can the federal government play a role with the additional funding that we've provided recently here to advancing these projects identified in the blueprint?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're working with the east side, west side folks to figure out where we can put that funding to the best use?
And that's critically important, yes.
Mr. White, you've talked about the Las Vegas detention dam in your testimony, and you talked about other efforts. What's the status of the project, and how long is it going to be to fulfill the goal of getting the most out of this?
Yeah, Los Banos Creek Detention Dam is currently going through its closing of the environmental process, and we will be in construction next year, Congressman.
Mr. Bordeaux, you talked about the efforts that Westlands is undergoing on recharge goals and a host of other areas. Can you highlight on how much Westlands alone, along with many of the other water districts that are focusing on water recharge, and now we have water to recharge, how we can best do that?
Well, we're putting incentives in place to try to get as much water into the ground as possible. I think currently we're putting 1,000 acre-feet a day into the ground, and we're trying to find innovative ways to get caught up because there is a lot of water, and I do think our goal is to try to either farm with it or recharge the aquifer.
No, it's a real opportunity, not just water districts, but farmers as well.
And there is on-farm recharge. We are allowing that, and
right,
so
and
it's happening as we speak.
And the waiver of the 215 areas with the permit process allows us to go forward on that. We need to take advantage of the opportunity while they're here now. Mr. Chairman, my time has run out, but I want to thank you, and I'll submit the other questions that I have. Mr. Faguda, I'm glad you talked about the Seaborn project that we want to get over the finish line, and a lot of work to do, and your purpose here, thank you, highlights our efforts with the community that we got to work together. It is complicated, it is controversial, and food is a national security issue that we all, I think, engender and we care about.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. And with that, I recognize Mr. Valadeo for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start with Mr. Sutton. How long has the sites project been, I guess, in the process of where it's at now?
It was first contemplated back in the 1950s, but with the Delta Reform Act in 2009, a state bill, we formed the Sites Joint Powers Authority in 2010. The Prop 1 was passed in 2014, and since that time, efforts have really ramped up. So, but I think the real work probably started in 2010 to make this project a reality.
When do you think you'll actually break ground?
It's a loaded question. It depends on the outcome of a couple processes. One, the State Water Resource Control Board. We need to get our water rights.
Do you believe we'll break ground?
I'm an optimist, so I'm going to say yes. But it was 2024, and we've pushed that date to 2025. And I want to mention, because this goes to the Fish Act as well, one other challenge is that we did a biological opinion in 2019, but now because of change of winds, not change of circumstance, we're doing a new one. And now we can't get our biological consultation done because of that effort. So that is one of our real challenges as we sit here today as well.
So you still don't have an exact date of when you think you'll break ground. You actually think it might be within the next 10 years?
Yes, so I'm going to start throwing chairs.
That's fair. Mr. Bordeaux, how many acres, how many farms had to fallow over these past few years?
Oh, I would say the majority of farms in Westlands had to have at least some fallow ground. The farm that I farm, we were, I don't know, 60, high 60, 70% fallow.
60 to 70%. Do you think that was a pretty consistent number across the valley?
Well,
or across Westlands?
In Westlands, yes, that's a very high number of fallow ground.
Yeah, so about 2/3. How many communities, cities, actually get water from the same place that those farmers out on West Side?
Well, there's several communities on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley that rely on surface water. Kalinga is one of them. They don't have groundwater to fall back on, and so they're completely reliant on surface water, and they nearly ran out of water this year.
So you got communities like Kalinga, Avenal, Huron, Kettleman, all these different communities are relying on the exact same water. And so when we hear people in the news or people in the media saying things about this being a farmers versus fish thing, it's people who live here in the valley.
As a former city council member in Kalinga, I know that I intimately understand the details, and we cut back. I mean, last drought, we've made people fallow their front yards and really dramatically reduced the amount. And the Bureau of Reclamation punished us by giving us a percentage of what we actually saved. So it was like, okay, you save this much water, we're going to give you a reduced percentage of that. And on top of that, when you run a water treatment facility, you have to sell water. You have to have highly sophisticated people to make sure you meet these water quality standards. You can't do that if you aren't selling water.
All right, thank you. Mr. Fukuda, I understand Tulare County will account for about 25% of all the fallowing that will take place in California as a result of SGMA, as the implementation of SGMA. Has DWR been understanding of the recent floods impacting groundwater sustainability plans that continue to be denied by the state? Are there any extensions of those planned deadlines being offered in account for massive rain events?
No, everything, it does not seem to be that there's any recognition of any ongoing, issues in our area, nor at the State Water Resource Control Board, where we find ourselves now as inadequate. So I would say I don't think there's a recognition of that.
It's probably a little bit more broad of a question. I don't know who would best answer this, but something I've heard a lot, and today out at Dykstra's, you can really see it as we were driving along near some of those canals. You would see a lot of brush, a lot of trees, a lot of fallen debris stuck in the trees in these rivers and creeks, impeding the amount of water that was supposed to be flowing, causing a lot of the flood damage that we're experiencing. And obviously it's going to cost us a lot of money. One, it's going to cost the farmers. Hopefully the federal government will play a role in helping to remedy that. Why does it take so long to clean up some of those? Why aren't some of these local farmers given the ability to clean up some of these things in their own backyards when they're making the effort? They're applying for the permits. They're applying for the processes to allow them to do that. Who would be best to answer that? And what agencies do we point fingers at on this one?
I think it's very, I'll take a stab at it, but, to get into these natural streams, which we call them rivers or creeks or streams, you have to get in for your core permits to get in and access those. So sometimes you get stuck in that process and getting the permits in to do your maintenance. So it's not one which a farmer can often get in there and make that happen. You have to have an agency. The agency will make those requests, and sometimes those take time and or they don't get authorized.
What agencies are we looking at?
Army
Bureau-
Corps of Engineers is the lead one. Jeff, in your area might.
No, I was agreeing with everything you were
Yeah.
saying. I was just going to add also the mitigation associated with that work can be incredibly expensive.
All right. Well, my time's expired, so thank you, Chairman.
Thank you,
Can
Mr.
I add to
Valdeo,
that fishing-
and recognize Chair Westerman for 5 minutes. I'm sorry, Mr. Groot, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I would add to that list of issues. Fish and Game also has a lot to do with it, because we have a lot of trees that are dead, they're ready to fall over in our creeks, but they are not allowed to do anything to them because there might be a hawk or a bird or something in that area.
Congressman, it's also just a huge maze of, you've got Fish and Wildlife Service, you've got Fish and Game, you've got the Corps of Engineers, and everybody kind of points at each other also. So if you're a private individual wanting to get a permit, it's a maze to go through as well.
Anybody else want to weigh in? No? Okay, then Chair Westerman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bentz, and thank you to all the witnesses today for your testimony. It's been very informative. Just one thing to add on to what we were just talking about, and I think as Representative Lamalfa mentioned, we passed H.R. 1 last week, and part of that was to have one federal decision, which is very similar to Mr. Calvert's bill, where you don't have competing interests with federal agencies, and nobody takes initiative because nobody knows who's in charge. So I think that could really help. This morning when we were out at Front, and Mr. Phillips was telling us about, you had maps there showing where dams could be built, where dams could be raised, where a lot more infrastructure could be built, where he talked about all the water that's coming down the streams now, how much snow melt there is. It's evident that California produces enough water. The problem is the infrastructure to store it and the operation of that infrastructure. I often said that you could put my mother in a race car and she's still going to drive at about 55 miles an hour at top end. And as I look at the massive infrastructure that's here now, and Mr. Phillips, I think you alluded to it this morning, it's an operational issue. Like, you could be doing so much better with the infrastructure that you have if you didn't have all the impediments to operation. And that's not caused by laws Congress passed, it's by administrative actions that are happening. So, but there's also opportunity and the need for more infrastructure. So I'm going to kind of put you all on the spot and go down the line and ask the question, is it more infrastructure or operations, or is it a combination of the two? And if you want to take just a brief minute to explain your answer, that'll be fine too, Mr. Phillips.
Yeah, in the near term, we need its operations. The last congressional action in 1992, CVPIA, was the last time Congress weighed in on environmental requirements. There's been about a half dozen times after that government agency employees have imposed further requirements than CVPIA.
So you're saying operations. I'm going to have to move quickly here. Mr. White, operations or infrastructure?
I would say it's equal, operations and infrastructure. I have no doubt that if we built new infrastructure, there could be some procedures to stop you from using it.
So you're getting into my next question. If we build the new infrastructure, if you get the race car, or is it still going to be an operational issue?
Yes.
All right.
I say it's both. I want to highlight that in the Sac Valley along the Sac River, where most of this water comes from, all of our projects in our generation have been environmental projects, fish screens, removing other things, helping. We want to solve problems. But during these droughts, the environment's suffering as well. If we could raise these reservoirs, we can benefit our communities, our farms, and the environment, which is the fish are still all this work and investment, and the fish numbers are still declining.
So it's operations.
I would say it's a combination of both, but in the immediate near term, we need to focus on recharge and streamline that process and get as much of this water into the ground. So when it's dry, because it will be dry again, we'll be able to manage through it, because we're not going to be able to build infrastructure, large infrastructure project in the short term, which I think we need to continue to invest in it and make sure it happens. But we need to focus on taking advantage of the opportunities we have right now.
I feel we need to get with the operations, because you can't get to the infrastructure. You can't even get in your race. Are you wearing the right pants? Are you wearing the right shoes? Do you have the flame retardant on? So we need to get the operations out of the way, but we do need to focus on the infrastructure because you need the tools once you get into the race. You're going to need to fix the car. You're going to need the gas tank, extra gas tank. So we're going to need that stuff.
And for me, area specific, if you get into the hills, we can be building dams there. If you get into the valley where our local farms are, we need infrastructure. We need a few more canals to transport water to those drier areas. Another piece of it, though, is personnel. On a year like this, all the districts are just slammed. They cannot get ahead. There are channels that are empty right now. There's nobody to open them up. There's nobody to monitor them once they're full.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I want to move on pretty quickly here. It appears that the immediate thing that could be done to make the situation better is operations, but there is definitely need for long-term infrastructure. So we're focusing on California water today, but within the next month or two, I'll be over in Colorado. We'll be conducting a similar hearing to this. You might know today the Biden administration put out a plan on the Colorado system and said that they need to cut 2.1 million acre feet from the Colorado River, and didn't say who needed to cut, either Southern California or Colorado. And so as a member from Arkansas chairing this committee, when I go to Colorado and they say, well, you know, California wastes their water, we're not generating any more water here, we shouldn't be sending more Colorado River water to California. How do we counter that argument?
I would say it in reverse. We have an opportunity to quit letting so much water go out to the ocean. We have senior water rights to Colorado, so we can solve our problem in California, and it'll free up more water for Colorado. We all need to work together. We need Colorado senators to support us.
And the Colorado senators are the ones wanting to have the hearing in Colorado as well. So I know it's a very contentious issue, but it's hard to justify all the releases in California.
Yep. We're not trying to justify them. They're wrong.
I know it's not. I'm preaching to the choir here. I know, but so there's so much more we could talk about forest management, which could add a tremendous amount of additional water without having to even build reservoirs. But I'm out of time, and I'll yield back to Mr. Bentz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. I took the time over the last couple of weeks in anticipation of this hearing to actually read the LA Times, and hate to admit it in front of this group. But wonder of wonders, some of the people writing editorials actually agreed that there should be more water stored. I almost fell out of my chair when I read it. But the question is, how does this group right here build on that public opinion change? I'm on the Judiciary Committee. We had dinner the other day with Newt Gingrich, and he was talking about if you're going to affect change, you better have public opinion with you. And so I would ask the panel, and I want a short answer from each. We'll write down the list. How do you think this group right here can help affect public opinion in a way that actually moves the needle? And I do not want a real long answer, so keep it short, please.
We need to call out every time when there's an operational waste, like we saw in the last year. Every time there's a regulatory operational waste.
Yeah, how would you call that out?
Like we did with those who remember the first flush, which was the regulatory requirement that says when we get our first storm of the year, for 2 weeks we have to not pump it, not store it, we have to let it go out to the ocean. And that's not based on any specific act of Congress.
Mr. White.
Yeah, redevelop or refresh the vision of what California is and why agriculture and the environment
How?
is.
How?
Well, through developing that vision.
I know, but through social media, through the LA Times, how?
All the above.
Yeah, we're the 5th biggest economy in the world in California. Farms, our communities, and our environments suffering. We're hearing from all the people that we have to do this. Sites Reservoir has 23 partners from every corner of the state, Southern California to Redding. and I've got a waiting list. People say, oh, it's too important. I've got a waiting list that want in. And as this project gets closer, that waiting list is going to grow. We need to build more reservoirs.
Okay, but again, I'm hearing a lot of statements of what you should do. What I want to know is how you get the word out and how you change public opinion.
I think public opinion sees it. I mean, what's happening now and what we went through the last 3 years, if that doesn't highlight it, people are screaming for it. We just got to give them what they're asking for.
Mr. Bordeaux.
Well, I think we need funding. I was part of an effort to start a local digital news organization, and so I have reporters reporting on the facts in the news every day, and I think we all need to try to educate people on the importance of agriculture and farming. I think people used to grow up on a farm or live near a farm, and they understood the complexity and the challenges that were associated with, and they've lost touch with that, and we all have to communicate, because it's a wonderful story that we all have, and we just need to make sure everybody understands it.
And you'll tell everybody how to join your your
the
messaging system.
The San Joaquin Valley Sun.
Thank you.
Most people in here probably already read it.
Read it. I would say that I agree with everybody here in getting the word out through the social media and the other avenues, but I think there are some projects out there. There are low-hanging fruit. Selfishly, I think we've got one where this committee can then use it as a flagship for funding, where it's called multi-benefit. We hit the environment, we hit the agriculture, we hit the disadvantaged community, and we target those projects where the communities benefit at all levels and use that as a good funding stream, a representation.
I have no idea. If we can talk these gentlemen here on my left, if we can ask them to work with us, have them tell us how do they expect California to work? Is it going to be to take all the water? With no farming, there's no revenue for California. California will die and move out. What is their solution?
Thank you. So just an interesting thought. I was astounded when we went to the Freant project this morning. I saw 9,000 CFS flowing out through the pipes below the dam. And it struck me that we should, and I've been doing this back in the D.C., calling out the value per acre foot of that water in San Diego, where they pay $3,800 per acre foot for desalinated water. $3,800 per acre foot, there's 17,800 acre feet a day flowing through those pipes below the dam. You take that times 3,800, it's $64 million a day if you value that water as they do in San Diego. And so it seems to me that there's all kinds of opportunity if we can get the proper word out, and what we should be debating as to how best to do it, because I think we've all been saying the same thing for the last almost 2 hours. I just think we need to get the message out. With that, my 5 minutes is up, and I'm going to turn this over for a few final words to Mr. Valdeo.
Well, I guess this is getting close to the end. First, I want to thank all my colleagues for being here. I know 2 of you traveled a long distance. 4 of you share the same area as I do, so you're very familiar with this. But the opportunity to have this here, the reason why this is important is a lot of the times this goes on in Washington. The room that we have these in is a lot smaller with a lot less people. Sometimes we have folks like these travel all the way across the country to testify, but the ability for us to do it here with all of you here to see for yourselves, this is kind of the process we go through. We've got more steps to go. And I know the chairman, both chairmen here, will be bringing up water bills in the next few months, and so we'll have more debates on this, and the hope is that we bring them to the House floor, move them off the House floor, and see what we can get from our senators. But this is part of the process. It's a slow process. It's not fun, and it's not exciting. But at the end of the day, the process has to play out because people need to be involved, have the opportunity to be engaged in this process, and have their voices be heard, to give you the opportunity to give us feedback as this process moves forward. But this type of legislating is very important. And as you can see, it's way, way beyond due. I mean, we need to get these things done 30 years ago, much less yesterday. But it's a frustrating thing. But the fact that they're taking the time to come here, see the valley, spend some time here, learn from folks, is something that I really appreciate. I know a lot of folks here really appreciate, because this is how we get that message back to Washington. One other organization that was mentioned but wasn't addressed, Self-Help Enterprises. Tammy sitting up here in front is one of my friends that I work with quite a bit over the years. So when we run out of water on farms, obviously we have our calls we make. Sometimes they fallow fields, but when a community runs out of water, there's only one person you call, and it's Self-Help Enterprises. They've got about 2,000 communities right now, or cities or individuals, who are actually, when they run out of water or a well goes bad, they come in, they install tanks, and they truck water out there, and they keep water going to homes. So thank you for what you guys do. Very and the folks that took time to be here. I'm glad you didn't have to travel all to Washington for this, but you could have got some sightseeing in, but we got to do the sightseeing today. So appreciate you taking the time to be here in the preparation for this. Aside from that, thank you, Chairman Bentz, for the opportunity and for your time as well.
So before we adjourn, there are forms on the table back there for additional public comment. I want to thank all of you for being such a great audience, and we are adjourned.